Good morning, CraftCon. I hope you're all enjoying the sunshine this very fine morning. I'd like to say hello, I'm Simon Day. I'm co-founder of Once Upon a Tree Cider and, of course, chair of the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association. I would like to wish a very good morning to all cider makers, cider writers, cider sellers, distributors, cider legislators, and most importantly, cider drinkers to CraftCon 2021. And when I say cider, I also mean perry, and ice cider, or ice perry, and cider or perry co-ferments. And I could go on. We at the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association are an inclusive bunch and welcoming of diversity in all its forms. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us over the next couple of days. You're all really welcome. The original CraftCon was held 2 years ago in 2019, and we held it at Pershore College in Worcestershire. And it was hailed a huge success by those who were able to attend. And we had hoped, in fact, we had 90% of the planning already done, to hold our second event last year, again at Pershore, but for obvious reasons, we were unable to do so. And at that early stage of our first UK lockdown, we didn't know about virtual conference platforms. Most of us hadn't even heard of Zoom at that stage. And who knew then how we would all become experts in online video calls to teach our kids, to socialize with friends and families, working from home, or to learn new skills. Last year, we did manage a short series of webinars under the banner of CraftCon Live. So we did have some activity, which although successful in their own right, they were limited in interactivity and the networking that you can get at a true conference event. So when our committee were discussing holding CraftCon this year, we were then into our third lockdown. And we felt the sensible option was to run with a virtual event to ensure we kept within the rules and to ensure we keep our members and speakers safe. Now, having attended CiderCon this year and seeing how the American Cider Association made such a success from using the Hop-in platform, I felt confident we could do something similar. And so here we all are. If you attended CiderCon, you'll find this all pretty familiar. But if you're new to this, relax, you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. And if you need any help whatsoever, just reach out on the event chat and one of our committee, our organizers or moderators will help you get to where you need to be. I'm also delighted to welcome so many new names as attendees to the conference this year. I do hope you enjoy yourselves and find the sessions and networking enlightening, thought-provoking, and fun. And by tomorrow evening, you'll feel enthused, probably exhausted, but in a good way. And hopefully you've made a few new cider buddies along the way. You are now, of course, full members of the association. So I look forward to interacting with you at future events and hopefully meeting you in person at some stage when we can do normal activities again. Of course, one of the main benefits of doing this online, and despite the time differences, although there's no jet lag, is that we can easily connect with our international friends. And I'm delighted to see so many join us to give us their insight from an international cider perspective over the next couple of days. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our sponsors, without whom we would have not been able to put on the show, and have helped subsidize the amazing tasting case that accompanies the sessions. And if you didn't order one yet, there are a few left, so you can enjoy with the recordings at a later date. But first, I'd like to welcome some of our sponsors. The National Association of Cider Makers support the UK cider industry and ensure that our voice is heard, representing all cider makers, large or small, national, regional, through local affiliation of the regional bodies, and ensuring the industry is treated fairly and that the government understands the issues and priorities faced by cider makers and cider apple growers. They provide support on technical issues, research, apple growing, promoting the importance of cider making to our rural communities. And not only have they generously supported CraftCon financially, I'm delighted that Mark and Lorraine will be available during the trade stand times during the sessions to take your questions on subjects such as labelling, ingredients, duty, HMRC, anything technical on legislation. So do please take time to visit their booth and have a good chat with them. Our first gold sponsor is Core Equipment. Core Equipment are leading suppliers of craft beverage equipment, catering to the beer.
Obviously, on a hoist that's going to gravity feed the bottling.
Oh, I've
already inserted the tap here at the top. Obviously, just connected it, the pipe to the back of the bottling.
I do apologise for that. Yes, so Core Equipment are leading suppliers of craft beverage equipment, catering to the beer, wine, cider communities, markets, and their product ranges from single pieces of equipment to full turnkey systems, all tailored to suit your needs. Working in partnership with some of the industry's best manufacturers, selecting the latest technology, best quality and most cost-effective options, they can provide production equipment to suit your individual needs. One of their most popular products in recent years is the Cody canning system. And of course, canning is a hot topic and will be discussed in the sessions. So do go and talk to Hannah and Dan and see if they can help you with your production equipment needs, including mills, presses, filtration, tanks and bottling machines, and so on. Our next gold sponsor is Vigo. And Vigo, of course, is a familiar name to anyone making cider or wine in the UK. And they've been part of the scene for over 37 years. Supplying cider and perry producers with carefully chosen processing and packaging equipment from renowned manufacturers. All of their equipment is supported and backed up by a team of engineers, and they hold spares, they service, they repair, and have a dedicated technical support line. So again, please talk to Camilla, Tom, and Andy at their booth and talk about what's new in bottling, kegging and canning, pressing mills, bin tippers, apple washers, pretty much anything you might need to process cider. And of course, they do a big range of consumables too. Our final sponsor, again, very familiar, is Lallemand. Lallemand, a privately held Canadian company with divisions all around the world, founded at the end of the 19th century. The company is specialized in the development and production of and sale of the yeast bacteria and their derivatives, as well as enzymes. The Enology division, based in Toulouse, in France, is a major focus on research and development, both in-house and in collaboration with renowned research institutes. This strength in partnership is equally important for R&D work in cider, as they seek to broaden their knowledge applicable specifically to apples and their unique fermentations. The wonderfully clever and helpful Sigrid will be on hand at the Lallemand booth to talk fermentation, flavour development, and of course much more. You'll certainly learn something new. I know I do every time I talk with her. And we're also delighted to have our silver sponsors, Enartis and Murphy & Son, also manning booths over the conference period, and they're there to talk to you about their processing aids, yeasts, and generally how they can help you with your cider making. All of our sponsors are spending time to discuss what they can offer for you as producers and as business. They've laid on presentations, videos, webinars to explore, so do delve in. Now, without them, we would struggle to do what we do as cider makers, so please show your support of us and them by taking some time to visit them throughout the trade show times. In fact, the booths are available throughout the event, so if you're up in the middle of the night, you can still get a cider conference hit by looking through their booths. I would like to thank the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association Committee for their help in supporting getting CraftCon off the ground again, and in particular our CraftCon crack team of Albert Johnson, Lucy Mayerova, Tom Tibbets, Richard Toft, and Rory Souter, who have been incredibly generous with their time as volunteers to organise the speakers, the sessions, and of course the tasting box. Please say hello to them through the chat and networking, and they will be happy to help with any technical issues you may have, so please do reach out to them. So ahead of us, we have 21 sessions covering three main themes, broad themes of cidery, orchards, and business. From the more technical presentations, such as genetic fingerprinting of apple varieties, our vibrant panel sessions on packaging of cider into kegs and cans, to orchard biodiversity and the thorny subject of cider duty. Important topics on diversity, equality and inclusion in the world of cider, including our keynote session tomorrow with the Cider Women Group, examining the role in women and how we can all help to redress the balance. We have some wonderful sessions where we explore makers' techniques, their cider making ethos and philosophy, with the all-important accompanying tastings if you've bought the case. The difficulty, of course, will be deciding what to join live and what to catch up on when the recordings are released after the event. Wherever you end up in the sessions, please pour in with your questions during the event. The session moderators will get to as many of them as they can as they progress through the sessions or towards the end of each session. And of course, if you miss the opportunity to ask something, just get hold of the speaker in the chat areas and send them a message. I love that. Outside the main sessions and the 4 dedicated trade show sessions, do have a look at the networking button. There you'll be able to be randomly matched with other attendees, sponsors or speakers for a quick fire speed dating style 3-minute conversation. It's lots of fun. It's kind of like the chance meetings you have at a real conference between sessions or if you're queuing for the loo. And it's a really fun way to make some new connections. So I think we're at an exciting time for craft cider. The fact that you have joined us to delve deeper into the subjects that bind us is testament to that. I've been so happy to witness the growth and development of an increasing number of exciting producers, many getting inspired by each other and, of course, other drinks categories, often with an eye on tradition and culture, but prepared to break from convention and boundaries with the products they're bringing to market through new techniques, packaging form, and, of course, collaborations. The increase in cider communicators, people such as Gabe Cook, Adam Wells, Pete Brown, James Finch, the Burham Collective, among many others, and publications, Full Juice, Graftwood, Pellicle, are all getting our exciting world of craft cider out to a new audience. Cider clubs in Manchester, now Brighton and Birmingham, getting craft cider into the urban landscape where we have rarely managed to penetrate before. We're niche, within a small percentage of all alcohol sales in the UK, and yet that represents our opportunity. It's all there for the taking. Getting a wine drinker to occasionally swap from buying a bottle of wine for a 750ml of fine traditional method cider, introducing a craft beer aficionado to the funky pleasures of a wild ferment bittersweet cider, whilst looking after our cider drinking fan base with good, clean, easy to drink ciders that we all tend to reach for on a sunny day. It sometimes feels slow, but it's happening. I am convinced these small wins are the start of an exciting gain of market share for those who are making the quality products. Whilst it's difficult to get reliably accurate information for the market, in our market, in craft cider, our association has been working hard to get data, especially through the past lockdown periods, to help us and to help the NACM help our members in difficult times. Working on the Alcohol Structures Directive, having our say on how we feel we should be treated fairly, to a chance to get nonsensical legislation or duty rates examined, whilst helping smaller producers to grow. This work continues, and of course we need accurate data to work with, so please fill in the survey questionnaires when they come in the coming months. It really helps us to help you, which is so important, particularly after the year we've had. And of course, looking to the future, we're pleased to have awarded 4 of our Jean Noel bursaries this year to help future makers gain further knowledge and experience, and of course to report back their findings to our members in due course. But back to the conference. I would like very much to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Andrew Lee, author of every craft cider maker's favourite tome, Craft Cider Making. Andrew, and I'm not sure he knows this, but he was a vital part, a vital chunk of the inspiration and motivation that started my own cider journey when I attended his talk on cider making, where he delved in great detail into yeasts in a small green tin shed that was later to become the Once Upon a Tree cidery at Dragon Orchard in Putley, all part of the Big Apple blossom time back in 2007. I'm not ashamed to admit, I still from time to time refer back to the Whittenham Hill cider portal to check a fact or two. His research in cider at Long Ashton and expertise in all things polyphenol or tannins have helped shape cider production since the 1970s. And although he is retired, he is still incredibly generous with his knowledge and experience and encouragement in the pursuit of quality cider production. We were delighted to get Andrew signed up as our keynote speaker for the 2020 conference, which obviously didn't happen. But one webinar and a year later, it is a great pleasure to finally welcome him to our virtual stage, this time to talk about his recent experiences visiting the wild apple forest, the birthplace of the apple in Kazakhstan. So Andrew, I'm going to stop broadcasting and give you the stage. Andrew isn't with us yet, but hopefully he will be here very, very shortly. We know he's online, but we just need to get him onto the backstage. So, Andrew, if you've got the backstage link, to join me backstage and we can get you broadcasting.
Hello, Simon. Hello.
Hi, Andrew. Hi.
I'm sorry, I didn't realise it was necessary to log in again. I'd also already logged in. I didn't realise I had to do it a second time. Okay, I'm ready to roll if you are. Sorry about that.
Brilliant. Yeah, we're still broadcasting, so off you go. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, right. Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. I'm not totally au fait with the tech. Thank you very much, Simon, for your complimentary remarks. I'm sure they're not fully deserved, but let's pass over that. What I would like to say is thank you so much to Simon and what he called his crack team for organising this event again online, because I'm sure it's a fantastic thing to be able to do, and it keeps the impetus going. As he said, craft cider is a very vibrant area now, and anything that can be done to keep it going must be done, I guess. So today I'm going to talk about my trip to Kazakhstan, which is nearly 4 years ago now, and I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to share my screen when I do that, so I will not be able to see myself. That's probably not a bad idea. And you should be able to see the slides that I'm going to present. So here we go. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I hope this, no, that's not the right, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute, that's not right. Let's get this up. I'm going to try this again. Share screen, here we go. Yep. I hope you can all see that. So here we are, the trip to the Tien Shan foothills where cider apples began, question mark. And the Tien Shan foothills here, as you'll see, I hope you can see the right-hand side here. This is the mountain range of the Tien Shan, which forms the boundary between Kazakhstan and China. It's actually related to the Himalayas in terms of its geological formation. It's a range still being generated, as it were. And this was where it all happened. So why would one want to go to Kazakhstan? Well, as most people probably now know, eastern Kazakhstan is the home of the cultivated apple, Malus domestica. And the foothills of the Tien Shan mountains were once covered by very large forests of wild sweet apples for several thousands of years. And it is believed that the best apples were selected and distributed by people other than humans, that is bears. There's a native bear which loves the apples there, and horses as well, which are native to the area. And then eventually the fruit, when humans arrived and the trade route started, fruit came gradually to apples, particularly came to Asia Minor and Europe via what we now call the Silk Road trade routes, but they were already developing from maybe 1500 BC, something of that sort. And that story, I think, is now fairly well known. Just to show it in pictures, you've got the origin of Malus sieversii here. And then you've got the movement westwards through Asia Minor and into Europe, and then the introgression, as they say, of crossing with Malus sylvestris, the wild European crabapple, which comes into it a little bit. And then going the other way, sieversii goes through Asia and crosses with Malus baccata, the wild Siberian crab, and then becomes the sweet Asiatic apple. So that's the sort of general drift, which is generally accepted. There are quite a lot of tweaks to this currently being worked on by the molecular biologists. And I have to say, I don't understand the molecular biology, but I just read the conclusions in the papers. Anyway, how do we know all this? We know it because it was written down first by Johann Sievers, who was a German botanist in the 18th century, who described the huge apple forests outside of Almaty and over up to the Tien Shan mountains. Nikolai Vavilov, who was a Soviet geneticist, and he was very interested in the origin of crop plants, apples. Wheat particularly was one of his special areas. He fell foul, unfortunately, of Lysenko during Stalinist times. And he was imprisoned and died in a prison camp, very, very sadly. But he was really the man who put this on the map. And then a student of his, Aymat Jangeliev, who worked in Almaty at the Botanical Institute, who followed up Vavilov's work and managed to put this on a very firm footing indeed. And he, at some point during Soviet times, was discredited, but later, towards the end of his life, when Kazakhstan became independent, he was restored, and he got the recognition that he deserved. And then more recently, we've had people like the Oxford botanist Barry Juniper, quite a lot of American and French workers, and now they're following all this up with modern DNA analysis so that you can, in effect, prove what was just sort of the general sort of geographical analysis previously. Jangeliev wrote this wonderful paper, which is 240 pages long, The Wild Apple Tree of Kazakhstan, published in Horticulture Reviews about 20 years ago. It was translated into English by an American team, and it contains fantastic amount of detailed information about apples. So the question we want to ask really is, are cider apples any different from dessert apples, and in terms of their origin and their composition? And opinions do vary somewhat. Jangeliev himself made quite a few selections of Malus sieversii, which he thought would be suitable for cider making, although he wasn't a cider maker himself, obviously, but he'd read up about it. and understood the necessary balance between sugar, tannin, acids, and the rest of it. There is modern DNA work which gives some conflicting results on the balance between Sieversii and Sylvestris in cider apples. Very briefly, this is a French paper which was published about 10 years ago on this topic, and they say the introgression from Malus sylvestris was significantly higher in dessert than cider cultivars. So it seems that they're more like the original Sieversii apple. But these people, it's a recent paper came out from an American group, say that they find that cider apples derive more of their ancestry from the European crab apple than do dessert apples. So you could, I kind of pays your money, takes your choice. But it's worth saying that the data that both of them use, the data sets are different. The French work was based on French bittersweets for comparison. The American work defines a lot more widely the meaning of cider apple, includes a lot of sharps and bitter sharps, which we might not even recognize as cider apples ourselves. But in any case, Malus sieversii is obviously the main apple, and Sylvestris has just provided a little extra top up in terms of the genes. So this is looking more closely. The Tien Shan mountain area is down here to the southeast. Almaty is the main town in that area, and Almaty is the name in Kazakh language means the father of apples. So even in the name of the town, it was already obvious that apples were a main part of the area. So here we have the country of Kazakhstan. It's a very large country. It used to be part of Russia. It fell under the Russian Empire in the times of Peter the Great and into Soviet times. It was used as a bit of a dumping ground for people that the regime didn't like, both the Tsarist regime and the Bolshevik regime. But after the fall of the Soviet Empire in the 90s, it became independent, and coincidentally, they then discovered their heritage of apples, or rediscovered their heritage of apples, and this is really why we're talking about it now. So, unfortunately, most of the lowland apple forests that are near Almaty were lost to agriculture in Soviet times. I'll cover that a little later in the talk. So the remaining wild forests are not near Almaty itself very much. They're in the very national park border areas near the Chinese border, for which reason they are generally closed to outsiders. So it's extremely difficult to get permission to go there. You can't just rock up and walk in. It isn't like that at all. But I was extremely lucky because I met these people, Alex and Aijan Thomas. Alex is British, Aijan is Kazakh. And they work in Almaty, and for various complicated reasons, they decided it would be nice to set up a cidery using Kazakh apples, not necessarily Malus sieversii in the first instance, but Kazakh apples in the home of the apple. So they have a cider, she's just beginning to get on the market now out there, which is called Apple City Cider. And in order to set this up, they were involved with a number of people who were kind of consultants and had helped to them. So one of them was myself. The other one, so this is myself. This is Ryan Burke from Angry Orchard in the States, Peter Mitchell, who everybody knows, and Claude Jolicoeur, the author of the Cider Makers Handbook in Canada. So we were people who had helped Alex and Aijan get off the ground. And so they thought it would be a jolly good idea to go and visit the wild apple forest, because we were all very interested in the concept. And none of us thought we would ever get there. And even they had difficulty getting all the relevant permissions and all the rest of it. So it was quite a labour of love to get all this put together. Anyway, it all came together, and we started off in Almaty. This is the Holiday Inn in Almaty where we stayed. Just another modern plate glass building, I'm afraid. And then that's the view from the hotel window. So you can see it's a very 20th, 21st century city, probably like cities all over the world. Nothing at this point that really distinguishes it from anywhere else. We had a familiarization. We had a little bit of a walk around in the Central Park. It's a lovely old Russian Orthodox cathedral, which they're restoring. A memorial to some Kazakh exploits during the Second World War. This rather nice building is a museum, is now a museum of Kazakh musical instruments. And here are three rather lovely stringed instruments, the dombras, which you'll see later as well. And this one rather nice, I thought was a Kazakh bagpipes, but I have no idea what it sounds like. I didn't hear it played. Anyway, here are the area. This is us in Almaty here, and we're going to go to two areas. We're going to go to the Ile-Alatu, quite close to Almaty, a day trip's worth. And then later on, we go way up here onto the Altai, onto the Jungarski Plateau, which is a long way away and more difficult to get to. So here we are, we're setting off on the road, a lot of traffic, busy place in the outskirts of Almaty, a busy place. There's a lot of traffic around. A little bit of interest here. This is a drainage channel carrying water flows from the mountains. And as you see, it's stepped because the water flow during the spring melt from the mountains is so great that it would scour the drainage channels otherwise. So they have to be stepped and barried and weired in order to try and impede the water flow, just to slow it down. So water management in this part of the world is quite important because all their water comes off the mountain slopes. And the first place we encountered, although we didn't have time to stop here, was some burial chambers which date from about 500 BC, probably from the Scythian people who preceded the modern day Kazakhs. And one of the interesting things here was a golden man. They found it's a typical long barrow burial of a high status individual with a lot of gold objects. This is all in a museum which we didn't have time to visit. But I'll just show you this notice because it's got the three languages here. We've got the Kazakh language at the top, which is written currently in Cyrillic characters, used to be written in Arabic characters, now written in Cyrillic. I believe they're going to write it in the Roman alphabet sometime in the future. Kazakh is a Turkic language, and the Kazakh people are Turkic as well in ethnic background. They're not Slavic people. Here is Russian, of course, because Russian is a very well known and well understood language within Kazakh, and obviously English because everyone else understands English. And we're driving on up to the first national park, and I look at this and I think, goodness me, this could be somewhere in the three counties. It's got the same sort of rolling landscape, the same hilly landscape, the same dotted parkland look to it, and it was uncannily familiar, I have to say. So here we are entering the national park, this is the valley that we're in, and nearly all these trees are apple trees. It's a kind of a mixed apple and hawthorn forest. And we're walking up here, you can see apple trees on our left. We're walking up the path through the valley and getting into the wild apple territory. Here you are, all those trees that you can see there are wild apple trees interspersed with little open areas, glade areas. And here we are under the apple trees, and Peter's smiling broadly because it is our first encounter with the wild apples. Of various types, some of them are really quite bright red, some green, some yellows, all the colours you would expect that you see in cultivated apples. And more of the way in which the apple trees grow. And here we are, I think this is Peter picking some fruit. And here you go, have a taste of this, he's saying. And we did an awful lot of tasting, as you can imagine. We tasted everything we could. Because we were really the first people going to this area looking at it from a cider making perspective rather than from a dessert apple perspective. And I think that was a little bit different. Other wildflowers, we've got some a wild mallow here, which looks quite familiar. We've got a fritillary butterfly and a thistlehead. We've got lots of bees, lots of beekeeping, a lot of wildflowers, and not only the apple blossom, of course, but other wildflowers. So there's a lot of beekeeping. And then what on earth is this? Climbing up the apple tree, here we have these. And these, of course, are wild hops. And we were all terribly excited. And our first reaction, oh, gosh, we've got to tell Tom Oliver and people about this because the hops and the apple trees are actually growing together here in the wild. We found this very revelatory. But it turned out later when we explored it that the hops are not actually native. They're feral. They were introduced at some other time during the Russian occupation, presumably for brewing, and eventually spread out into the wider landscape. So they're actually a bit of a pest, and they do tend to throttle the trees, so they have to keep them cut back. So what originally seemed to be something really rather intriguing seems to be a little bit different from what we originally imagined. And here's some apples with scab. So don't let anybody tell you that wild Malus sieversii doesn't suffer from scab, because it does. But obviously there are some individual trees, or individual that are not prone to scab, and those are the ones which are being worked on, particularly by, I think, the American botanists, to try and breed scab resistance into modern apple cultivars. But yeah, I mean, Malus sieversii is as susceptible to scab as any other apple. It's just that the gene pool is so wide, is that it is quite possible to select apples which are not prone to scab, and they could be worked into to modern selections. The way the apples grow is quite intriguing, I think, because as you can see here, they tend to be rather multi-stemmed, and the understory, once the apples get going, the understory is pretty much shaded out. And so there's not much space for anything else to get a look in. And look at these, they really are quite dense and quite close. Now, originally when we looked at them as sort of rather naively, we thought, oh, but these are all in straight lines. Somebody must have planted these. The whole thing is, is a bogus, it's quite bogus. We are here under false pretenses. But it turns out what happens, and Jangalev's paper covers this in a little bit, if you look at it, is that actually a lot of the apples come from root suckers. So although seedlings are very important, obviously, for generation of new varieties, many of the apples of the trees within the actual forest are coming from root suckers. And he did some very painstaking work excavating the roots to demonstrate this. So the reason they're in straight lines is simply because new plants are being thrown up from the roots which are going under the ground. So it's a classic root sucker thing, which obviously you don't see so much in the cultivated apple, though if you think of the way that we grow our rootstocks, I guess that propensity is something that we are still using. Nothing to do with apples at all, but obviously domestic turkey and his harem, a Kazakh version of a Jack Russell, taking doubtless a well-earned nap. A little bit of wood chopping going on here. And of course, because it's in a forest, they've got fire beaters, though I do rather think that the number of fire beaters and the rather small number of cans of water would probably not do very much in case of a real fire, but who knows. And here we have, it's time to stop for tea now, and the guy on the left is the forester of this area. This chap was one of our minders. Remember, this is a post-Soviet society. People are looking at, watching you all the time. And he was our minder. Anyway, he's also got another function, which is he's putting on the samovar for tea. He's just heating up the water with the wood. And this is as important to them as it is to us, having a nice cup of tea. So here are some nice teapots. And of course, you drink the tea in these bowls without any milk. And this was our tea come lunch table. They gave us a very good picnic. What was most interesting was this. This is apricot jam. And the point about this is that not only apples, but also apricots come from the same area, from the Tien Shan. We were there too late for the apricot harvest, so we didn't see any of that. But apricots, probably pears, possibly some plums, are all originate in the Tien Shan foothills. And when you ask the question why, and this is covered in Barry Juniper's book, which everybody should get if they're really interested in this. It's called The Extraordinary Story of the Apple. I did show it in a previous slide. When you ask the question why, it seems that for some reason, which I don't really fully comprehend, the Tien Shan area was not glaciated during the last ice age, or the last sequence of ice ages, so that what happened was that the rosaceous fruits like apples and apricots and pears could still evolve and develop in the Tien Shan area, while the rest of Europe and Asia and North America even was sort of stopped. They couldn't evolve any further while the ice was holding sway. And so this was why the evolution of these plants continued to develop in the area. And then when the ice disappeared, of course, by the normal processes of plant migration, also assisted by man, these fruit crops were able to spread out and then hybridize possibly with other native other native varieties of the same, or native species of similar type. So this is quite an interesting concept, that a lot of our fruit crops are actually coming from that area of Kazakhstan. These guys are following us around all the time. They're making a video of what we're up to. And if you want to follow that through, you can see it's there, ciderinkazakhstan.com. It's a Vimeo video. It runs for about 2 hours. You have to pay a tenner to watch it if you're really in for a long session. You know, if you want to have a look at what we really got up to, then it might be worth your while. Anyway, we were documented, put it that way. Nice blue butterfly. And then our first encounter with wild horses, as you see. And the horse is, of course, another native of Kazakhstan. It really comes from the big plains and was domesticated there first before it spread over the rest of Eurasia and eventually into North America as well, of course. And wherever you go, apples of various sorts. And here we are, Peter and Claude having a taste of this particular apple. So by the end of the first day, to be perfectly honest, we had recognized that everything we were looking for in a cider apple was potentially present in all the apples that we were tasting. And every apple was different. And that's the whole point about apples, as we all know. They don't come true from seed. They're extremely heterozygous. So every apple is a different apple. And they have a huge variety of textures, of aromas, of acidity, of sweetness, of tannin, and all the varieties, all the attributes that you would seek in a cider apple, we already realized by the end of our first day were present in what we had been tasting. So you don't necessarily have to invoke any other genetic component to our modern day cider apples, for all that it may well be present. And this was quite a revelation to us. I think that huge diversity, which encompassed many of the things that we will be looking for in cider apples, as well, of course, as in dessert apples. So now we're going on to our second visit, and this time we're going up this very long highway to a place called Sarkand, where we stay the night, and then we go to the Jungarsky National Park, and we stay there another night. And so this is what happens next. Well, first of all, we go to the Kazakh equivalent of Tesco to stock up on supplies, mostly bottled water, to be perfectly honest. And here we go on the highway. This is the highway to China, which eventually goes through the Tien Shan mountains and ends up in China. A rather forlorn bus shelter on the side of the highway. Rather strange, I thought, but still, there you go. And this is the kind of steppe. These are really the plains of Central Asia. This is the steppe landscape which you see on the way. You're not in the mountain foothills really at the moment. You're on the edge of the plains. And we stop for our lunch. And here you've got a little bit of an oasis, a little bit of water coming out of the steppes, a little stream, and a few willows growing beside the stream there, and a flycatcher having his lunch too. And rather nice thistle there. And again, on the steppes of Central Asia, you know, was a nomadic lifestyle, still is a nomadic lifestyle for some. And here is a chap with a mixed flock of sheep and goats. Here he is again. And they herd these with horses in the very traditional way. And then as we go further on, we're finding people selling melons and watermelons. These are people who just raise these in the little plots on the back gardens and then sell them on at roadside stalls. Obviously, in Soviet times, this sort of thing was not encouraged, but since the country became independent, it's got a market economy, and this is the sort of thing which house owners are encouraged to do. And this was the hotel we stayed in Sarkand, not a very interesting building, but there you go. And just outside is a ditch, a drainage ditch, and it's full of apples which have fallen down from somewhere, and they're just rattling around in the stream. And you couldn't really escape the apple wherever you go here. The sunset on the hills, rather nice. And then the next morning, the same hills, but we discovered there's an apple monument at the back of the hotel, which is a kind of fountain, which is in the shape of an apple. There's another monument, another little obelisk in the shape of an apple here. So they're very proud of their apple heritage. They recognize that this is a big part of what makes them distinct. And there's a different flycatcher, of course, this time having his breakfast, presumably. And this is us having our breakfast before we set off on the next leg of our trip. And as we leave Sarkand and go towards the hills more, we're finding all these people selling top fruit. And here we've got mostly apples, some plums and damsons, some pears, obviously still some melons and things. Now, of course, these are not necessarily or even at all wild apples. I mean, one has to admit there is a lot of, during the Russian times, of course, a lot of cultivated apples came back into Kazakhstan and were grown in orchards and are still grown in orchards for the normal domestic market. So there's a big issue about trying to keep the Malus sieversii as pure as possible without backcrossing with the cultivated apple, which has come back in from the west, as it were. So that's quite a thing. But the fact is there's a lot of apples there, a whole range of different fruit, and these are being widely sold. And this is our first view of the mountains themselves, the Tien Shan mountains. This is August, but they're still snow-capped, as you can see. And on the other side of this is China. On the far side is China, the side you can't see. And that is Xinjiang province, where the unfortunate Uyghur people live, who of course are quite closely related to the other people of Central Asia, like the Kazakhs themselves. By now, the tarmac road has run out, and this is the best road you're going to get. What I want you to notice is all this here. This is a wheat field which has just been harvested. And in Stalin's time, so much of the apple forest was lost. It was deliberately cut down. It was turned over to wheat, which obviously is, apples grow quite well in places where wheat grows quite well, as we know. And so this is all harvested wheat land, but you can imagine 50 years or 100 years ago, this would all have been apple forest. So it's kind of sad and salutary to see it, to know that that was once covered with wild apples. And occasionally you get the wild apples just popping up like this. Here's Claude examining this particular tree. And we were told, and you can see the wheat field behind, it. And we were told that now in the national park, if an apple springs up spontaneously like this, you are not allowed to cut it down. You have to leave it. And possibly the idea is that it will be eventually regenerate and the forest will recover. I don't know. I mean, it sounds slightly a vain hope. But that is what we were told, that there were penalties for cutting down wild apple trees now because they hope to regenerate them. Here's a truck that broke down on our way, which is getting in our way. So we were trying to shift it, but with absolutely no success. And you can see here the wild apple trees that have sprung up, these seedlings that have sprung up by the roadside. So the apple forest, in a sense, is wanting to take back over from the wheat fields. So good for the apple forest. Eventually, a grain truck arrived and was able to pull our friend out of the way. And this is one of our trucks we were able to get through. And we arrive at a forest hut on the edge of the Jungarsky protected area. And eventually we're going to see the biggest apple tree in the forest. Now, we weren't desperately interested in the biggest apple tree in the forest, but obviously the national park authorities felt that something we had to see. So we had to make the pilgrimage. Some of us went on horseback, some of us walked, because we can more easily look at the apples on the way when we walk. Other things we can see on the route, we've seen a nice, very typical flora of this sort of area, geranium, we're very familiar from what we have at home. A burdock, very similar to what we have at home. This is a hawthorn, Siberian hawthorn, but again, not very different from our native hawthorn. And an aspen here. So the botany is very, very similar. You're about 1,500 meters up here on the edge of the mountains, and the botany is very, very similar to what we're used to at home. It was uncannily the same. And you could kind of get the feeling that if the apples were happy here, they would be happy in the three counties, because a lot of things were very, very similar. There's a nice view of the apple forest there. And this is the biggest apple tree in the forest, apparently the oldest tree that they know of in the forest. They reckon it's about 300 years old. And I think everybody is sort of encouraged to come and visit it, and pay their respects. So we visited it and we paid our respects. It is a fine specimen, I have to say. Whether it was always multi-branched or whether it was pollinated at some time or grazed by animals, I really don't know. But that's what it is. And this is the fruit from the oldest apple tree in the forest. We picked up some of it, and it's totally uninteresting. It was very dull. It didn't have a lot of sweetness. Texture was mealy. It was not much good for dessert, not much good for cider, unfortunately. But it was a very fine tree, I have to say that. More of the landscape around and about. And then these interspersed with these meadow areas. So you've got lightly apple forests with meadow areas in between. More of the same sort of thing. And then eventually it's time to come back down. So we're going back down past a number of apples, which we're going to, Peter, Claude, myself, Ryan, are going to taste these and evaluate them in our own minds. Would they be good for cider? Would they not? Whatever. And many of them would have been. And eventually we're coming down for lunch. And they were the Kazakhs are enormously hospitable, considering that we didn't really owe them anything at all. They prepared a very nice lunch for us, which we much enjoyed. And then we're pressing on a bit further. And you get these streams running off the Tien Shan in the background there. You get these streams running off the mountains. Nice brimstone or clouded yellow butterfly there. I'm not sure which it is. And then we met this horseman, a very traditional horseman here, rounding up his horses. He's looking after this flock of horses, herd of horses, I suppose. So he gave us a bit of a demonstration as to what was going on. And here he is. But he's a wonderful blend of the old and the new, because he's got his Nike trainers on, he's got his waterproof jacket, and in his pocket there, he's got his mobile phone. Because all these guys keep in touch with each other now by mobile phone. And that's the way it works out there, because it's very rapidly come into the 20th, 21st century. And they're keeping up. So although it's very traditional, it's also very up to date. And here's the guy on his horse, and here's the chap in the car. So both are running in parallel. And the horse is a very, very important animal to them. A lot of horse meat is eaten in Kazakhstan, of course. And here we are pressing on. This is a little stream that we have to ford. This is a bigger river that we have to cross by a bridge. And what's interesting about these rivers, as I kind of started to say before, is that they come off the Tien Shan and they run into the main plains of Kazakhstan, and eventually they all evaporate. None of these rivers reach the sea. It's a very landlocked country, and there's no outlet to the sea, and they actually all end up just evaporating. And I guess the water cycle back it goes to the Tien Shan again, which I found quite interesting. My simple geography, I thought all rivers ran into the sea, but apparently it's not the case. Onwards and onwards. This is a four-wheel drive Moskvich. The director of the national park is driving that ahead of us. And here's a real yurt. This is a real working yurt. A herdsman who's got sheep and goats again on here. And he's got a real job to do. And this is when we arrive at the camp, the next forest camp. And this is an ornamental yurt, shall we say, which is actually for visitors. And we're going to have our dinner in there. And so this is the dinner we're having. It's called bish parmak, and it's basically a sheep stew. It's a mutton stew, really. And so here it's being prepared for all of us in a big cauldron, because there were obviously quite a lot of us. There was not just the four of us, plus Alex and Aijan. There were the photographers. There was the whole support team, the drivers, and all the other people involved. It was a big expedition just to get us to go and see the apples. It took a lot of organising. So that's the food, and here we are having our banquet, and you can see the inside of the yurt, all the nice hangings and decorations. And at a Kazakh banquet, everybody has to thank everybody else, which is quite difficult when you don't have much in the way of mutual languages. And Aijan in the centre here had to translate everything between English and Russian or Kazakh, and she really worked overtime. 24/7 she worked. I'm very, very grateful for everything she did. So there we are, nice hanging inside the yurt. The yurt itself, the fabric was made from polyester or nylon, but not from animal hides, but the struts are wood, obviously. And then the sheep's head, it falls to the oldest of the party, which turned out to be me, to carve the sheep's head, and particularly to carve the ears off and to give it to the youngest of the party, who turned out to be Aijan. So we went through the ritual, and then cut various bits of cheek meat and passed it round to the rest of the party. But that's what apparently you have to do at a Kazakh banquet. So we did the right things. And after the banquet, we had entertainment. This is the dombra again. This lady's playing the dombra and singing as well. And of course, they've got the benefit of modern Western amplification, which makes life much easier. And then after the party, we have a dance around the fire, which is all very convivial. You see how many people were involved in this particular operation. This is just a fraction of the people who were involved. And the next day is, as it were, the morning after the night before. And yet more apples we see by daylight. And then we have a talk from Professor Isin, who himself, he's now director, was involved with the Botanical Institute, and he was a student of Jangaliev, so he is now involved with the conservation of the wild apple in the national park, and he is telling us various of the problems that they have, how to study the germination rates. For instance, the seedling germination is not as good as you would expect, and they germinate much better once they've been through the gut of a bear than otherwise. We never saw any bears, but there had been bears around, and there was some bear droppings which had been around a few days before we arrived. The bears are very secretive, but they are there. And they have problems with things like fire blight, which is not native to their area, but of course the trees have no resistance against fire blight, and various other pests. They're generally trying to keep the area as pure and as much pure Civersiae as they can, and enhance the multiplication of Civersiae and keep out any cultivated apples. Another nice fritillary butterfly, and apples and more apples and more apples. You really couldn't get away from the huge diversity of apples that were there. And finally, it's time to say goodbye. We say goodbye to the horses, and we get back in our truck or in our station wagons. And this was a very dirty, this is, we've been through the dirt roads here. And actually, you are compelled by law when you get back on the highway from the dirt roads to stop and wash off. There are washing stations that you have to stop at, and they actually had to wash the car off, all the cars off, so they don't get they don't get all this mud on the highway. Apparently, that's part of the Kazakh highway code, as it were. And so here we are back to Almaty. And here is Almaty again, a big, noisy motorcard city. You wouldn't believe that fourth lane on the inside lane there is supposed to be a cycle track, but nobody actually cycles in Almaty. So, it just gets used as a fourth lane. Anyway, there we go. And we were on our way to the Botanical Institute because at the Botanical Institute, they follow up the work of Jangaliev, who has sadly died in 2009. And this lady on the right is the current director of the Botanical Institute, and she's talking to us and telling us a little bit about the work that they're doing. This is the key thing. We've got a lot of apples here. Jangaliev made selections of about 60 different types of apple, which he regarded as representative or typical of the Marvellous Civersiae, typical of what was growing as what grows in the Tien Shan. And he brought them back to Almaty, and he laid out this orchard. And so they've all been grafted, I think, onto standard rootstock 106 or something. And so this is their mother orchard, if you like, from which people can then take that material and use it in breeding experiments and all the rest of it. And what was the most interesting for us was this row here. I mean, it doesn't look terribly interesting, I'll admit. But the reason it's most interesting is because it says Jungarski Cider. And these were the selections which Jangaliev had made, believing that they would be good for cider. So good for him, brilliant. And this was one of them. It was a kind of a mild, bitter sharp. So yes, it would have been good for cider. Yeah, he got it right. And then indoors laboratory, typical little laboratory setup. And what they do every year is to press the fruit and juice it, and then do all the measurements of acid, tannin, sugar and everything else that they want to measure. So they've got a documented record of all these different trees and how they behave, how the fruit from them behaves over the years. And this is the kind of diversity that you see. These are just a few apples that were in my backpack when I got back to the hotel. It just represents the diversity of fruit that we saw. And by the end of the trip, we were firmly convinced, definitely, that all the characteristics we're looking for in a cider apple are present in the wild Malus sieversii. You don't have to invoke any other genes if you don't want to. And it would be interesting to see how far you could actually do cider making from pure sieversii without adding anything else. Anyway. So finally, I have to thank Alex and Tien Thomas of Apple City Cider for organising the whole trip, because it was really a once-of-a-lifetime trip, and very, very grateful indeed. And also to Peter Foster of Aerostana, who provided flights and sponsorship and made the trip happen in a kind of a realistic way. So thank you for that. I'm now going to come out of screen share, and I hope we can get back. Hang on, I'm coming out, trying to come out. Yeah, I'm now come out of screen share. So I hope, are we back now? Are you back there, Simon?
I think so.
Okay.
I can still see the screen share on the back end, but hopefully it's disappeared.
Okay.
I think you are still
sharing. No, sorry, I stopped sharing. Okay, right, here we go. Okay, good.
Andrew, that was amazing, fantastic. What a journey that most of us can only ever hope to do ourselves. Brilliant. And you really brought it to life. Thank you. We've got a few questions that people have typed in. I've got a couple of comments as well.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if I missed it at the very beginning because I had to just pop off to do something else. But is there a history of cider making in Kazakhstan? Has it been done, or are Apple City Cider really pioneering that?
They're pioneering it. It's quite remarkable. For all that apples have been there for so long, it's one of the few countries in the world where apples grow that doesn't have a cider culture. I think it's largely because the people were very nomadic for most of.
I've lost.
You still there? Sorry, we seem to have lost something. Hello. Hello? What's happening here?
Andrew, you're okay. It's Simon. I think his.
Okay, all right. Then I'm not going to leave. All right. Okay.
Like that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll stay here then. So, is there any point me trying to answer that question?
Can you hear me, Simon?
Simon seems to be locked out, doesn't he?
Sorry, not Andrew.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You should still be able to hear me, I think.
I can hear you, Albert. Can you hear me?
Now I. Oh, hang on. It's my fault. Oh, is Simon back?
Hi, back.
Hello.
Hello. So I just left the room and came back in again, turned it off and on again, and hopefully we're all up and running. So yeah.
Can everybody hear me now? You can hear me again, can you? Can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
Okay, right. I was just trying to answer that question, Simon. I think the point was the people were very nomadic for most of their history. So they didn't sort of have the kind of a culture which allowed them to settle and make cider or even juice. But what they did do, we were told, is they used to harvest the apples in the autumn, obviously, and then cut them up into apple rings and dry them. And then they would take the apple rings on their journeys, on their nomadic journeys. They would have straight strings of apple rings. And when they wanted to consume the apples, they would actually boil them in water. So they put the apple slices back in water and then drink the juice, as it were, the reconstituted juice, and eat the pulp. But then nobody, as far as we know, had ever got as far as doing fermentation. They do have fermented beverages out there. Of course, their main fermented beverage is kumis, which is fermented mare's milk. Yeah. Which is a mixed yeast lactic kind of. So they're not unfamiliar with fermented beverages, but cider was never part of it.
Now there's an interesting co-ferment to try. I'm just
thinking about that now.
Milk cider, let's go for it. Brilliant. It's really nice to see that the apples, the wild apples that are regenerating in those wheat fields, are protected. That's a great thing to see.
That's what we were told, and I'm sure that is the intention. Whether it happens on the ground is, of course, another question. But we saw quite a lot of regenerated apples there, so it was quite encouraging. Yeah.
So they're slowly coming back.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And the research that was being undertaken by Jangeliov, if I get the name right,
Jangeliov, yes.
and trying to find cider apple varieties that are good for cider. Is there commercial interest as well, or is this a scientific research only, or is it being backed by any producers around the world?
I'm not sure. I know that there's a big collection, of course, of Kazakh accessions in Cornell. Whether that taps into any of the Cornell, the work at Geneva out there in terms of cider, I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not aware that any cider makers have seriously looked into this. I think it's mostly the dessert breeders, and mostly the academic dessert breeders who are interested in this, in getting it to a stage where it might be useful for commerce to take it on. I'm not aware of any cider makers seriously adopting Kazakh apples at the present time. No. Yeah. So it remains an academic pursuit within Kazakhstan. They would like to establish links outside, but I think there are various kind of logistical and practical problems with it. Yeah.
We need Long Ashton Research Centre back, don't we? That's the thing.
Perhaps.
I'm going to ask a few of the questions that are in the Q&A.
Sure. Yes.
So first one was from Andrew Root. Can we access the translated documents that you presented early on in your presentation, Andrew?
Well, many of the modern ones just come straight off the internet. They're open access. The 240-page document by Jangeliov is in Horticultural Reviews, and you can download that off the internet, but you would have to pay for it. I'd probably pay 20 quid or something for it. But sure. If you're seriously interested, it's well worth it. And the best summary really is Barry Juniper's book, The Extraordinary History of the Apple, which is in its second edition now, which came out at the end of last year. That's published by Kew Gardens, and that's well worth reading to get an overall perspective.
Excellent. That will be on my shopping list. And I haven't yet seen the videos. I'm definitely going to. We were hoping to broadcast the video of your trip at CraftCon.
Yes, I know.
I really wanted to see it on the big screen because I thought that would really bring it to life. But I will bite the bullet, and I shall definitely have a good.
Just have to pay a tenner. You have to be prepared to pay a tenner.
I'm prepared to pay a tenner.
It is 2 hours. It does go on rather long, but it was tremendous. It was tremendous for us anyway.
Another question from Lucy Mayrova. Where did the pear come from? Are pears also found in the area? Pears,
we didn't. Well, we saw one pear in the main park in Almaty, in fact, for the first hour or two we were there, which was probably just an ornamental pear brought in from Russia, I would imagine. It was quite astringent, but I doubt it was a peri pear as such. We believe that pears come from the same area, but we didn't actually see any pears in the apple forests, I have to say. So I think it's an open question. Again, that issue of Horticultural Reviews that I referred to, where Jangeliev's paper is published, there's quite a lot of other papers in the same volume about the origin of other rosaceous fruit crops in Central Asia. So it's worth a read there, I think.
Sounds like another trip is needed.
Yeah.
A great question from Benjamin Jaff. What would a mixed bag of Siveraceae, i.e. mountain forest apple cider, taste like based on the group scrumping?
Well, I think it would be like, if it was a totally mixed bag and you just took everything that you ever saw, it would be pretty dull, I think. You'd have to be a bit selective, as you would anyway, and you're going to have apples which are fairly firm so they're easy to press and have got the right characteristics. I think the point I was trying to make is that it's not going to taste any different from the cider that we're already familiar with from cider varieties that we use in Western Europe and North America. And that's the fascinating thing to me, that all the potential was already present in the Siveraceae that we met.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Albert, along the same lines, but when you tasted all the apples, did all four of you usually agree on their quality, or did anyone find value in a variety that the others agreed with? I think I can guess the answer.
Yes, there was certainly there was a difference of opinion from time to time, for sure. But that's partly just because the way we were looking at it from the cider making point of view. You know, some thought it was too tannic or too aromatic or not aromatic enough or whatever. But yes, there was definitely a divergence of opinion, as there would be with any cider makers anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. If you put 4 cider makers in a room, you're going to get 5 different opinions.
Exactly.
So, question from Mike Brown. I'm going to have to keep saying this.
Civersii.
Thank you. Apples available in local markets or anywhere else for purchase?
You mean local markets in?
I assume in Kazakhstan rather than...
I can't directly answer that. I mean, it's quite possible that some of the apples that we saw sold at the roadside stalls had a high proportion of Civersii in them. I mean, what I can tell you is that at one time, when in Soviet times, they actually had a baby food factory in the neighboring town of Lipsynsk, which is very close to the national park, just on the edge of it. And they actually they sent people out into the wild apple forests and harvested the wild Civersii and took it back to the factory to make apple puree as baby food. The trouble with it was apparently that the production, I didn't mention this, but the productivity of the apples, I mean, we talk about biennial bearing, but it's hugely variable. We were there in an off year, but you wouldn't know it because as far as we were concerned, there was lots of fruit. But in an on year, apparently you can't even walk under the apples because the place is knee deep in apples. And the problem was that the factory would have a glut of fruit one year and then no fruit the next year or hardly any, so it didn't become an economic proposition really. But yeah, I mean, they have definitely been used, but as I say, for commercial purposes locally, the worry is that a lot of the imported apple, like the Russian Apport, which is a standard dessert variety, which has been back imported, if you like, into the area, they're worried about hybridization, so that worried about losing the purity of the Civersii apple. Apparently, the purest Civersii are on the other side of the Tien Shan in China, in Xinjiang province, because they've been less affected by back transmission of genes, because they've been that much more isolated. But obviously, currently, politically, that area is completely out of bounds, so nobody can get there at all.
Another one from Mike Brown. Are you aware of them? Are they in Kyrgyzstan across the border?
Yes, they go all the way along the Tien Shan range, and they are in Kyrgyzstan as well. Yes.
And do they have any common names that you're aware of? The Civersii?
No, I think they're just apples. I think they're just regarded as apples, as far as I know. Because every apple is different. It's not as if they've been selected specifically, so you don't give them a varietal name. Because every apple, as we know, every seedling apple is different.
Absolutely. And the last one I've got on here, is there a Kazakh version of the NACM?
Well, with only one producer at the moment, the answer has to be no. And given the bureaucratic delays that he's had to undergo to get his product on the market, you could do with an NACM, certainly, to negotiate the Kazakh bureaucracy, I think.
Maybe we can get an outreach program.
Yeah.
Just a couple more popping in now, just as we're nearly at the end of the session.
Yes,
but I'll just pop these in. So, did any of the apples you tried remind you of our favourites, Dabinet, Yarlington Mill, etc., from David Lindgren?
I don't think there was anything that specifically shouted out, yes, I'm a dead ringer for Yarlington or Dabinet. But they had all the same properties in terms of tannin balance and the rest of it. But no, there wasn't anything that was exactly the same. But they were all very close. Yeah. No, they weren't all very close. I mean, some of them were very close. I would guess of all the apples we tasted, probably maybe 5 to 10% would have been seriously worth considering as cider varieties, as something that was usable. So something of that order, Yeah. But enough to be interested in, and enough that you could understand where those characteristics came from.
And one last one then, just to finish us off. Mike Brown again. Would Andrew be interested in a visit to the Tien Shan Mountains in Kyrgyzstan? I'm not sure if that's an offer. That may well be.
Possibly. Who knows?
I'll leave you to connect after the session. But
all right, yeah.
So I was going to ask, would you go back? But I think maybe the answer is yes, you would.
I would love to go back because the whole area, the whole landscape is. I mean, you can go to parts of the Tien Shan nearer to Almaty on organised vacation trips, but nothing really close to the Apple areas, unfortunately, for political reasons.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to draw this session to a close. Andrew, thank you so very, very much for presenting the first session today. It's been brilliant to see your journey, and I'm sure people are going to have lots of questions for you. So hopefully you'll be around throughout the event for people to.
I'll be around on and off. Yes,
fantastic.
Not all the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Simon.
It's now, according to my computer, 11 o'clock. So I would encourage you to go and visit the sponsors and their booths, have a chat with the guys there and see if they can help you with your cider making endeavors. And then the next technical sessions will start at midday. Do keep up with the chat. Keep an eye on your messages. The little arrow near the icon in the top right of your screen shows you when private messages are coming through, so keep an eye out on those as well. Have a look, enjoy the expo, and we'll see you in the next sessions at midday. Thank you all.